On the morning of October 17th, in a fourth-floor apartment overlooking the quiet Rue de l'Université in Paris, a woman known to her neighbors and the local fromagerie as Anja Voss applied a final, delicate layer of glaze to the cracked surface of a 17th-century Dutch still life. Her tools were arranged with surgical precision: fine hair brushes, bespoke mixtures of pigments in small ceramic bowls, and a variable temperature heating iron for setting the varnish. Her movements were economical and deeply focused, the product of years of training and an innate, almost unnerving patience. To any observer, she was the epitome of a dedicated art restorer, a quiet expatriate who had found a niche in the city's cloistered world of private art collection. This perception, however, was a meticulously constructed artifact, far more complex and fragile than the canvas on her easel. Anja Voss did not exist. She was a legend, a cover identity assumed by an operative of the French General Directorate for External Security, the DGSE. Her true name was Elodie Martin, and her actual expertise was not in the chemistry of oil paints, but in the labyrinthine architecture of international terrorist financing. The art studio was not merely a workshop. It was an intelligence-gathering platform, and the delicate restoration of the painting was the final, mundane act she would perform before initiating the most critical phase of Operation Vermilion Thread, an audacious plan to dismantle a financial network that had, until that point, proven utterly impervious to conventional methods of surveillance and disruption. The strategic problem facing the DGSE, and indeed its partner agencies across Europe and the Middle East, had been escalating for 3 years. A resurgent extremist faction, operating out of the Levant, had developed a funding mechanism that was both agile and opaque, moving millions of euros monthly to fund operations, recruitment, and propaganda efforts across the continent. Initial analysis suggested a traditional Hawala-based system, an informal trust-based network for transferring value common in the Middle East and South Asia. However, attempts to penetrate it had failed spectacularly. Undercover agents were quickly identified and neutralized, and electronic intercepts yielded nothing but heavily encrypted, contextless data fragments. The network's architect, a shadowy figure known only by the codename The Treasurer, had fused the ancient trust-based principles of Hawala with modern technology in a way that made it a formidable challenge. He had layered cryptocurrency tumblers, decentralized privacy coins like Monero, and a network of seemingly legitimate small businesses, import-export companies, jewelry stores, and art galleries, to create a system with no central point of failure. Money never physically crossed borders in large amounts. Instead, value was reconciled through coded messages and settled via a complex web of offsetting debts and credits between nodes, with cryptocurrency providing the final, anonymous settlement layer. The failure of previous methods was a source of profound frustration at the DGSE's headquarters. Signals Intelligence, SIGINT, was stymied by the network's use of end-to-end encrypted messaging applications with custom-built cryptographic overlays, while the tight-knit, often familial relationships between the network's operators made traditional human intelligence, penetration, nearly impossible. The treasurer had built a system based on deep-seated cultural trust, which he then armored with cutting-edge technology, creating a hybrid fortress that Western intelligence agencies were ill-equipped to assault. The stakes were extraordinarily high. Intercepted chatter indicated the group was in the final planning stages of a coordinated, multi-city attack in Europe, and the funding for this operation was flowing, untraced and unstoppable, through the treasurer's network. The target profile developed by the DGSE's counterterrorism division painted a portrait of a man who was as brilliant as he was ruthless. The treasurer was believed to be a former economics professor from Damascus named Farid al-Hamdani, who had disappeared from academic life following the outbreak of the Syrian civil war. Al-Hamdani was not a frontline ideologue, but a cold pragmatist. A man who viewed the movement he served as a client and its financial health as his sole responsibility. Psychological assessments, pieced together from fragments of intelligence and academic records, suggested a personality characterized by extreme paranoia, meticulous organizational skills, and a profound contempt for the perceived vulnerabilities of Western financial systems. He operated exclusively from a secure location in the southern suburbs of Beirut, never using the same communication device twice, and adhering to a rigid, almost ritualistic schedule designed to minimize his exposure. His network was structured cellularly, with each node operator knowing only the identities of the nodes immediately upstream and downstream from them. This compartmentalization was absolute. A jeweler in Antwerp who received a deposit would have no knowledge of the art dealer in Paris, who would ultimately use that value to pay a logistics cell in Brussels. Al-Hamdani alone held the master ledger, the complete architectural diagram of the entire system. He had personally vetted and recruited every key operator, favoring individuals with established businesses and clean records, making them incredibly difficult to identify through traditional law enforcement screening. His communication protocol was his masterpiece. Transactions were initiated not with explicit instructions, but through seemingly innocuous business orders, art auction bids, or commodity purchases, with the true financial data embedded within metadata or steganographically hidden in image files. To an outside observer, it was just business as usual. To the initiated, it was the lifeblood of a global terrorist enterprise. This complex, decentralized structure was the core of the challenge. To bring it down, the DGSE needed not to find a single weak link, but to comprehend the entire chain. The audacious solution, conceived during a series of tense, late-night sessions in a soundproofed strategy room, was codenamed Operation Vermilion Thread. The plan's central premise was a radical departure from established doctrine. Instead of attempting to destroy the network from the outside, the DGSE would seek to infect it from within. They would not try to arrest the operators or seize the funds in transit, as these were merely symptoms of the problem. The goal was to map the entire network, identify its command and control structure, and ultimately gain access to the treasurer's central ledger. To do this, they needed to place an asset inside one of the network's European nodes, not as a mere operator, but as a provider of a unique, indispensable service. The proposal was to create a bespoke piece of financial software, a highly secure, user-friendly accounting and inventory management system, and have their asset introduce it to the network as a superior alternative to their current, more cumbersome methods of record-keeping. This software would be a Trojan horse of unparalleled sophistication. On the surface, it would offer best-in-class military-grade encryption, offline functionality, and features tailored specifically to the needs of businesses dealing in high-value, easily transportable goods like art, gems, or antiques. Its true function, however, would be hidden in its core code, a silent, encrypted exfiltration protocol designed to transmit a complete copy of the user's data to a secure DGSE server on a randomized, intermittent schedule. The plan was fraught with immense risk. The software would be subjected to intense scrutiny by the treasurer's own technical experts. Any flaw in its design, any anomaly in its behavior, would not only compromise the operation, but would almost certainly lead to the death of the operative. Furthermore, the cultural and linguistic barriers were significant. The asset would need to navigate a world of implicit codes and deep-seated suspicion with flawless precision. It was a high-stakes gamble, an intelligence operation disguised as a software startup, and its success hinged entirely on the creation of the perfect software and, more importantly, the selection and preparation of the perfect operative. The technological preparation for Vermilion Thread was a monumental undertaking, assigned to the DGSE's Clandestine Technical Services Division. Their first task was the creation of the Trojan Horse software, codenamed Argent. The development team, a small, isolated group of the agency's best coders and cryptographers, worked for 18 months in a secure facility, completely cut off from the outside world. They built Argent from the ground up, writing every line of code themselves to ensure no hidden vulnerabilities from third-party libraries could be exploited. The user-facing side of the program was a masterpiece of deceptive design. With an intuitive interface and robust features for inventory tracking, client management, and multi-currency transaction logging. The true genius, however, lay in its covert functions. The data exfiltration module was designed to mimic standard internet traffic, breaking the stolen data into minuscule packets, encrypting each with a different one-time pad key, and routing them through a complex, ever-changing series of anonymizing proxies and compromised servers across the globe. The transmission schedule was not fixed, but was algorithmically tied to innocuous user actions, such as saving a file or running a search query, making its electronic signature statistically indistinguishable from background noise. In parallel, another team focused on the physical tradecraft. They procured reams of 19th-century laid paper and reverse-engineered period-appropriate iron gall inks to create impeccable forgeries of provenance documents, auction receipts, and certificates of authenticity. These were not generic fakes, but were tailored to specific artists and historical periods, complete with simulated foxing and water stains designed to withstand expert scrutiny. Every tool, from the software to the forged documents, was crafted with the understanding that failure meant the immediate and certain demise of the operative who would wield them. The selection of that operative was the most critical decision of the entire operation. The psychological profile was demanding. The candidate needed the intellectual rigor of a forensic accountant, the patience of a craftsman, the social grace of a diplomat, and the cold-blooded discipline of a seasoned field agent. They found her not in their usual recruitment pool of military special forces or foreign service officers, but in the staid world of corporate finance. Elodie Martin was a senior auditor at a major international accounting firm, a quiet, unassuming woman in her early 30s who specialized in uncovering complex, multi-jurisdictional fraud. Her file was flagged by an internal DGSE talent spotting program due to a combination of her unique professional skills and a crucial detail from her personal history. Her younger brother had been killed in a terrorist attack in Nice several years prior. The agency's psychologists assessed that this personal trauma, if properly channeled, could provide the core of ideological conviction and mental fortitude needed to endure the profound psychological stresses of a long-term deep cover assignment. Her recruitment was a slow, delicate process of cultivation. It began with an informal approach, an invitation to consult on a supposed government anti-corruption task force. Over several months, the true nature of the work was gradually revealed. Elodie's initial hesitation gave way to a steely resolve. Her grief had not broken her. It had forged in her a desire for meaningful retribution, not of a violent nature, but a cold, systemic dismantling of the machine that had caused her family suffering. Her training was brutal and all-encompassing. For 2 years, she was immersed in a new life. She spent months in a remote safe house learning the intricate craft of art restoration from a retired master forger. She underwent intensive language training, perfecting a flawless, Berlin-inflected German to match her cover's backstory. She was drilled relentlessly in counter-surveillance techniques, secure communication protocols, and the art of constructing and maintaining a complex legend. The psychological conditioning was the most arduous part, designed to compartmentalize her old identity, to push Elodie Martin into a locked room in her own mind, allowing the persona of Anja Voss to become her primary reality. The construction of the cover identity, or legend, of Anja Voss was an exercise in obsessive detail. The goal was not merely to create a disguise, but to build a life, a complete human being with a verifiable history, a believable personality, and a plausible reason for being in Paris. Anja's backstory was that of a freelance art restorer from Berlin, the daughter of a minor diplomat, who had inherited a modest sum and moved to Paris to establish her own independent studio. The DGSE's legend-building section went to extraordinary lengths to backstop this narrative. They created a birth certificate, school records, and a degree from the University of the Arts in Berlin. They opened a German bank account in her name years in advance, populating it with a history of small, regular transactions. A sparse but consistent social media footprint was established, showing photos of Anja at galleries in Berlin, on hiking trips in the Black Forest, and with a small circle of friends, other DGSE assets, who would corroborate her story if ever contacted. They rented her Parisian apartment a full year before she moved in, using a proxy to establish a rental history. Her art restoration business was registered, and a professional website was created, showcasing a portfolio of her work. The pieces in the portfolio were real restorations, performed by Elodie during her training, on minor, historically insignificant paintings purchased at auction specifically for this purpose. Even the smallest details were considered. Anja was given a pet, a placid Russian blue cat named Klaus. The animal served a dual purpose. It enhanced her persona as a quiet, solitary artist, and its regular need for veterinary visits and food provided a natural, repeatable reason for her to move about the neighborhood, allowing her to conduct surveillance and dead drops under a cloak of mundane routine. Every element of Anja's existence was a carefully placed tile in a mosaic of deception, designed to create a reality so convincing that even Elodie herself could live within it, without betraying the artifice. The insertion phase of Vermilion Thread began with a deliberate lack of drama. Anja Voss arrived in Paris on a Tuesday afternoon train from Berlin, carrying 2 suitcases and a crate containing Klaus the cat. She moved into her pre-arranged apartment on the Rue de l'Université and spent the first 6 months establishing a pattern of life that was utterly unremarkable. She set up her studio, took on small, legitimate restoration commissions sourced through reputable art dealers, and became a familiar, if distant, presence in her neighborhood. She frequented the same bakery, the same market, and the same small park. This period of seasoning was critical. It allowed her to become part of the local landscape, a known quantity whose presence would no longer attract curiosity. It also served to test her legend in a live environment, forcing her to inhabit the persona of Anja day in and day out, under the constant, low-level scrutiny of everyday life. Her handler, a senior case officer she knew only as Etienne, communicated with her through a series of secure, pre-arranged protocols. Instructions were passed via encrypted messages, hidden within the metadata of digital images posted to a private online photography forum, or through brief, seemingly accidental encounters in crowded museums. During this time, the DGSE identified a specific target for her initial approach: a small, exclusive art gallery in the Saint-Germain-des-Prés district. Surveillance had established that the gallery's owner, a man named Jean-Luc Martel, was a peripheral but trusted player in the treasurer's network, using his business to launder money by massively inflating the prices of artworks in private sales. Martel was Anja's gateway. Her task was to insinuate herself into his professional circle not as an associate, but as a valuable and unique asset, whose specialized skills he would come to depend on. The build-up to the operation's core execution was a masterclass in patient, methodical infiltration. Anja began by visiting Martel's gallery as a potential client, expressing an academic interest in the obscure artists he specialized in. She engaged him in several long, technical conversations about art history and conservation techniques, subtly showcasing the depth of her expertise. After several weeks of these casual encounters, she presented him with a professional portfolio of her restoration work. She did not ask for a job, but instead offered her services on a freelance basis, positioning herself as a specialist capable of handling delicate, high-value pieces that other restorers might shy away from. Her first commission from Martel was a test, a moderately valuable 18th-century portrait with significant fire damage. She completed the restoration to a standard that was, by all accounts, flawless, returning the piece in a condition that far exceeded his expectations. This built the first layer of professional trust. Over the next several months, Martel gave her increasingly valuable and sensitive work. With each successful restoration, Anja deepened her professional relationship with him. She maintained her quiet, studious demeanor, never prying into his business affairs, focusing only on the technical aspects of her craft. The breakthrough came 9 months after their first meeting. During a conversation about the difficulty of managing his private client records and inventory securely, Anja casually mentioned a new software suite she had been using. She described it as a boutique program developed by a small German tech firm, designed specifically for the unique needs of art galleries and private collectors, emphasizing its unparalleled security and encryption features. She explained that it allowed her to keep meticulous, encrypted records of her work, accessible only to her. Martel's interest was piqued. The current system his network used was a clumsy combination of encrypted spreadsheets and coded emails, inefficient and prone to human error. Anja offered to give him a demonstration of the software, which she had installed on a secure, air-gapped laptop. The waiting period that followed was the most tense phase of the operation. After the demonstration, Martel requested a copy of the software to be vetted by his own technical contacts, the treasurer's experts. For 3 agonizing weeks, Elodie lived with the knowledge that her life depended on the skill of the DGSE's coders. She continued her restoration work, her outward calm a stark contrast to the intense psychological pressure she was under. Then one evening, Martel contacted her. His people were impressed, he reported. The software was clean, secure, and remarkably efficient. He wanted to adopt it for his own records and recommend it to his associates. The Trojan horse was inside the gates. The climax of Operation Vermilion Thread was not a moment of violence or a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet, steady flow of binary code. Once Martel and several other European nodes of the network adopted the Argent software, the exfiltration module activated. The data began to trickle out, not in a flood, but in a patient, almost imperceptible stream. From a secure server farm in a sub-basement of the DGSE headquarters, analysts began to piece together the puzzle. The first fragments were inventory lists and client names from Martel's gallery, confirming his role as a financial intermediary. But as other nodes in cities like Antwerp, Geneva, and Milan also adopted the software, a far grander picture began to emerge. The analysts could now see the transactions between the nodes, the coded instructions disguised as shipping manifests and auction bids. They could trace the flow of value as a deposit made to a jeweler in Belgium was used, hours later, to fund the procurement of forged passports by a cell in Italy, with the transaction settled through an art sale in France. For the first time, the DGSE could see the network's internal architecture. They mapped its key hubs, identified its primary operators, and began to understand its operational rhythm. The most significant breakthrough occurred when a senior lieutenant to the treasurer, operating out of Istanbul, began using Argent to manage the accounts for the entire European sector of the network. His data contained fragments of communication with the treasurer himself, providing invaluable insight into the command and control structure. The operation's climax was this sustained, silent harvest of intelligence, a period of months where the DGSE watched the enemy's most secret activities in real time, completely undetected. Elodie, in her Parisian studio, continued to play the part of Anja Voss, the unassuming art restorer, unaware of the precise intelligence her actions were yielding. But knowing that the silence from her handler meant the operation was proceeding as planned. She was the linchpin, the human element that had made the entire technical infiltration possible. Anja Voss's extraction was as quiet and meticulous as her insertion. After 14 months of the Argent software operating successfully within the network, the DGSE decided they had gathered enough intelligence to effectively neutralize it. A sudden extraction would raise suspicion and potentially compromise the data they had collected. Instead, they engineered a gradual, plausible departure. Anja began to talk to Martel about feeling creatively stifled in Paris, expressing a desire for a quieter life, perhaps in the Italian countryside. She started turning down new commissions, citing a backlog of work and personal fatigue. Over a period of 3 months, she slowly wound down her business. She found a new home for her cat, Klaus, with a neighbor, a detail that added a touch of genuine, humanizing sadness to her departure. One morning, she simply vanished. Her apartment was left tidy, with a note for the landlord and her keys mailed back. Her business website was taken offline. To Jean-Luc Martel and the rest of the network, it appeared that the reclusive German art restorer had simply moved on, a not uncommon occurrence in the transient world of expatriate artists. Her legend was left intact, a ghost that could, if ever needed, be resurrected. Elodie Martin was extracted via a complex route that took her from Paris to Lyon by train, then to Corsica by ferry, and finally to a secure DGSE facility via a military transport. The process of her debriefing and psychological decompression would take months. She had lived as Anja Voss for over 3 years, and the persona had become deeply ingrained. Reclaiming her original identity was a slow, disorienting process, a psychological excavation of the self she had been forced to bury. The consequences of Operation Vermilion Thread were profound and far-reaching. The intelligence harvested from the Argent software provided a complete, detailed schematic of the terrorist group's European financing arm. It was more than just a list of names. It was a dynamic, relational database of their entire operational method. Armed with this undeniable proof, the French government, in a coordinated effort with its international partners, launched a series of synchronized legal and financial actions. It was not a campaign of arrests and raids, which would have been public and messy. Instead, it was a quiet, systemic strangulation. Bank accounts were frozen under obscure anti-money laundering statutes. Businesses used as fronts had their licenses revoked for minor regulatory infractions. Key operators found themselves entangled in crippling tax audits and customs inspections that ground their legitimate business activities to a halt. The beauty of the approach was its plausible deniability. From the outside, it looked like a string of unconnected bureaucratic misfortunes. The effect on the terrorist group was devastating. Their flow of funds from Europe was reduced by over 90% within 6 months. The planned multi-city attack, which intelligence had confirmed was in its final stages, was indefinitely postponed due to a sudden and inexplicable lack of resources. The network, unable to identify the source of the breach, descended into a spiral of internal paranoia, with the treasurer reportedly executing several of his most senior lieutenants on suspicion of betrayal. The long-term strategic value of the operation was incalculable. It not only prevented an imminent attack, but also provided a new playbook for combating modern, technologically sophisticated terrorist financing. On a political level, it strengthened intelligence-sharing relationships between several European nations, who were given access to actionable intelligence derived from the operation. The psychological cost to Elodie, however, was immense. She had spent years in a state of absolute isolation, her only human connections being with her handler, a disembodied voice in an encrypted channel, and her target, a man she was methodically deceiving. The constant vigilance, the burden of her secret, and the act of living a meticulously crafted lie had left an indelible mark on her psyche. She could never return to her old life as a corporate auditor. The person she had been no longer existed. The DGSE offered her a permanent position as an instructor, training new generations of operatives in the tradecraft of deep cover. It was a role that acknowledged her unique experience while keeping her within the secure, structured world of the service, the only world where she now felt she truly belonged. The success of Vermilion Thread was never made public. It was a silent victory, measured not in headlines or accolades, but in the quiet continuity of life in European cities, in the terrorist attacks that were planned but never occurred. It was a testament to a form of warfare, where the most potent weapon was not an explosive, but a perfectly written line of code, delivered by a woman who had sacrificed her own identity to protect the lives of strangers. Was the profound and permanent psychological fragmentation of an individual like Elodie a justifiable price for national security? And in an era of decentralized threats, is this form of deep, deceptive infiltration, which turns human relationships into weapons, a necessary evil, or a step too far in the shadows? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel.